I've spent most of my life building things. Not just houses or businesses. I mean the kind of things a man hopes will still matter after he's gone. A family, a reputation, some financial security, and a future for the people he loves. But there's one thing I never managed to build. Patience for a man who walks into my house without permission, pours himself a glass of whiskey I've been saving for years, puts his feet up, and starts talking about my property as if I'm already dead. That man was my daughter-in-law's father. His name was Raymond Collins. And the afternoon he laughed in my living room ended up costing him far more than he ever imagined. But I'm getting ahead of myself. My name is Thomas Walker. I was 67 years old when all this happened, and I'd spent nearly my entire life around Boise, Idaho. I wasn't born rich. My father repaired farm equipment. My mother worked at a small medical office. We always had food on the table, but nobody in my family was sitting around discussing investment portfolios or vacation homes. If something broke, we repaired it. If we wanted something, we saved for it. That was pretty much the financial education I grew up with. I carried that attitude into adulthood. I started a small commercial maintenance company when I was 28. At first, it was me, one used Ford van, a ladder that had seen better days, and enough tools to fill half my garage. For years I worked 6 days a week, sometimes 7. Eventually, the company grew. 1 employee became 4. 4 became 12. We picked up contracts with apartment complexes, medical offices, restaurants, and eventually several larger commercial properties. I never became some billionaire businessman, but I did well. More importantly, I learned how to hold on to what I earned. By the time I reached my 60s, I owned my home outright, had sold most of my interest in the company, and had several investments that allowed me to live comfortably. I also owned a second house. That house is where this story really begins. It was a 4-bedroom home outside McCall, Idaho, about 2 hours north of Boise. Beautiful place. Tall pines surrounded the property, and from the back deck, you could see part of Payette Lake through the trees. My late wife, Susan, had fallen in love with the area years earlier. We bought the house 11 years before this happened. Originally, we imagined spending summers there. Then Susan got sick. Cancer. She fought it for almost 3 years. After she died, I kept the property mostly because I couldn't bring myself to sell it. Eventually, though, memories stopped being a good enough reason to leave a valuable house sitting empty. So I decided to rent it. My property manager was a woman named Laura Pierce. Laura had been handling rentals around Valley County for nearly 18 years. She was organized, practical, and not easily impressed. Exactly the kind of person I liked doing business with. She already had several interested tenants. All I needed to do was drive up, inspect the house one final time, take care of a couple small maintenance issues, and tell Laura to move forward. It was a Thursday in late August. I remember that clearly. I left Boise shortly before noon. The weather was beautiful. Clear sky, warm air, mountains ahead of me. I had the windows cracked and some old country station playing quietly. My biggest concern at the time was whether I should repaint the upstairs guest room before tenants moved in. That was the level of stress in my life that afternoon. Paint colors. About 2 hours later, I turned onto the road leading toward the property. Everything looked normal. Quiet houses, tall trees, a couple walking their dog. Then I reached my driveway and immediately knew something was wrong. There were 3 vehicles parked there. None belonged to me. A black Ford F-150 sat closest to the garage. Behind it was a dark blue Suburban. A gray Nissan sedan was parked partly on the gravel beside the house. The garage door was open. For several seconds, I just sat behind the wheel. Then I recognized the Ford. Raymond Collins. My daughter-in-law, Emily's father. I had seen that truck at my son's house before. I shut off my engine. And then I noticed music coming from inside. Not loud music. That almost would have bothered me less. This was casual music. Background music. The kind you play when you've settled in somewhere. I got out of my truck and walked toward the front door. It wasn't locked. That was my second surprise. I opened it and stopped. There were 6 people inside my house. Raymond was sitting in my leather chair beside the fireplace. My chair, one leg crossed over the other, glass in his hand. His wife, Patricia, was stretched across my couch with her shoes off. Their son, Brandon, was sitting near the window scrolling through his phone. A younger woman I recognized as Brandon's girlfriend was in the kitchen, and there were 2 other people I had never seen before. 1 man, 1 woman. The woman was barefoot. On my hardwood floors, they had food spread across the kitchen island. cheese, crackers, fruit, cold cuts. Someone had apparently gone grocery shopping. Then I saw the bottle. A bottle of Weller bourbon sitting open on my counter. It had been a gift from an old business partner. I'd kept it unopened for almost 4 years. I had planned to drink it when my first grandchild was born. Nearly half the bottle was gone. Raymond noticed me and smiled. That smile told me almost everything I needed to know. There was no embarrassment, no surprise. He didn't jump up and say, "Thomas, I can explain." Instead, he raised his glass. There he is, like I was late to a party. I remained standing near the doorway. Raymond leaned back in my chair. "We were wondering when you'd get here." I looked around. Nobody seemed particularly uncomfortable. Patricia actually waved at me. A tiny little wave, like I had just walked into her house. I looked back at Raymond. "What exactly is happening here?" He laughed. "Nothing serious. Relax." That word bothered me. Relax. A man was sitting in my chair drinking my whiskey in a house he had entered without my permission, and he was telling me to relax. He gestured toward everyone. Family came up for a few days. Emily said the place was empty. I stared at him. "Emily told you that you could stay here?" "Well," he dragged the word out. "Basically, that wasn't an answer." Before I could say anything else, Patricia spoke from the couch. "Oh, Thomas, don't make this uncomfortable. We're family." I looked at her. She smiled. Then she said the sentence that changed everything. "Besides, someday it'll belong to Michael and Emily anyway." Michael was my son, my only child. He was 33 at the time, and Emily was his wife. Before I could respond, Raymond laughed. Not a nervous laugh, not an awkward chuckle, a real laugh. He looked around at everyone else like Patricia had just made a clever joke. Brandon laughed too. Then Raymond lifted his glass. Exactly. That was the moment. Not when I saw the cars. Not when I discovered strangers inside. Not even when I saw my bourbon open. It was that laugh. Because suddenly I understood something. These people didn't think they were borrowing my house. They thought they were previewing their inheritance. I stood there and watched Raymond drink from my glass. And something inside me became very calm. People often think anger is loud. Sometimes it is. But the most serious anger I've ever felt in my life has always been quiet. I walked into the center of the room. Raymond was still smiling. I looked at him. Then Patricia. Then Brandon. Then the two people I didn't know. Finally I said, "I'm only going to say this once." The room got quiet. "This house belongs to me." Raymond shifted slightly. "My name is on the deed. My money bought it. And nobody in this room received permission from me to be here." Patricia started to speak. I raised one hand. Not aggressively. Just enough. "I don't care what Emily told you. I don't care what you assumed. And I definitely don't care who you think will own this place after I die." Nobody said anything. I looked directly at Raymond. "I'm leaving for 1 hour." His smile disappeared. "When I come back, every person and every vehicle needs to be gone." "Thomas." "No." One word. That was enough. I turned toward the door. Then I remembered the bourbon. I looked over my shoulder and replaced the bottle. Then I walked outside. No yelling. No threats. I got into my truck and drove away. About 10 minutes later, I pulled into the parking lot of a coffee shop. I sat there for a minute. Then I called Michael. My son answered quickly. "Hey, Dad." "Michael, I need to ask you something." He heard something in my voice. "What happened? Did you give Emily a key to the McCall house?" Silence. That silence answered my question before he did. Finally, he said, "Yeah." "When?" "A few months ago." "Why?" "She said if you were gone, she could check on things. Make sure everything was okay." I rubbed my forehead. "Did you tell her she could give the key to her parents?" "No." His answer came immediately. "Absolutely not." I looked through the windshield. "Her parents are there." "What?" "Raymond. Patricia. Brandon. Brandon's girlfriend. 2 other people I don't know." Michael didn't speak. "They've got food everywhere." Raymond opened my bourbon. "Dad. And apparently they believe the house is basically theirs because you'll inherit it someday." Another silence. Longer. Then Michael said, "Emily never told me. I figured. I'm sorry. You don't need to apologize. But you trusted your wife. That's not a crime." He exhaled. "What are you going to do?" I looked at the coffee shop in front of me. People were walking in and out carrying iced drinks. Normal afternoon. Normal world. I'm going to make sure nobody gets confused about ownership again. After I hung up with Michael, I called my attorney. His name was Robert Hayes. Robert had represented me for almost 17 years. Business contracts. Property transactions. Estate planning. He knew that when I called in the middle of a Thursday afternoon, I wasn't calling to chat. I explained everything. He listened without interrupting. When I finished, he asked, "Are they still inside?" "Probably." "Did you give them permission at any point?" "No." "Did your son?" "No." "Did you know your daughter-in-law had given them access?" "No." Robert was quiet. Then he said, "Document everything." That was exactly what I intended to do. Before driving home, I called Laura, my property manager. I told her to delay any rental activity for 1 week. She asked if something had happened. "Something I need to clean up." "All right," she said. Laura understood boundaries. That was one reason I trusted her. About 40 minutes later, I drove past the house again. The vehicles were gone. Garage closed. Nobody outside. Apparently Raymond had decided I wasn't bluffing. Good. I returned to Boise. And for the next several days, I said nothing. That part mattered. Because if I had called Emily immediately, the conversation would have become emotional. She would have defended her parents. Michael would have been stuck between his father and his wife. Raymond would have claimed it was a misunderstanding. Patricia would have said everyone was overreacting. I had no interest in arguments. Arguments disappear. Paperwork stays. The following Sunday, Michael and Emily came over for dinner. We ate grilled chicken and potatoes. Michael told me about a project at work. Emily talked about a friend who had recently gotten engaged. Everything was normal. Then, halfway through dinner, Emily casually said, "My parents stopped by the McCall place last week." I looked up. Oh, she watched me carefully. They really liked it. I'm glad. The lake is beautiful. It is. She waited. I gave her nothing else. Finally, she said, "Dad said you came by." I did. Another pause. Then I asked Michael if he wanted more potatoes. He did. Conversation over. Emily looked confused. I think she expected anger. What she didn't understand was that I wasn't angry anymore. I was organizing. 2 days later, Robert called. "Thomas, your property manager contacted me." "What happened?" "She picked up some mail from the McCall house." I already didn't like the sound of that. "Whose mail?" "Raymond and Patricia Collins." I sat back. "What kind?" "Magazine. Insurance correspondence. Membership renewal. All addressed to them. At my property." I looked out my kitchen window. Suddenly their comfort in that house made more sense. How long does someone have to use an address before companies start mailing things there? Robert sighed. "Depends. But this tells us something." I know. They weren't treating this like a weekend visit. No. They were establishing a connection to the address. Exactly. That changed the situation. The food. The open garage. The mail. The relaxed way they had been sitting around. This wasn't some impulsive afternoon. They had started thinking of that house as available to them. Maybe even theirs. Robert and I began documenting everything. First came a formal incident report. Nothing dramatic. No police showing up at anyone's door. Just a dated record establishing that Raymond and Patricia had entered and occupied my property without authorization. Then Robert drafted a certified letter. Clear language. No insults. No accusations beyond the facts. Raymond and Patricia Collins were formally notified that the McCall property was privately owned, that they had no permission to enter or occupy it, and that any future unauthorized entry would be treated as trespassing. I didn't tell Emily. I didn't tell Michael. I certainly didn't call Raymond. The letter arrived at his house. He signed for it. That was enough. Then I called Laura. Rent the house. She already had several applicants. The strongest were a young married couple named Ethan and Rachel Moore. Both employed. Excellent references. Good credit. They wanted a long-term lease. I signed. $3,100 a month. They moved in September. Just like that, Raymond's unofficial vacation house had tenants. Life became quiet again, and I made sure Michael wasn't punished for any of it. That was important to me. My son had done nothing wrong. He gave his wife a key because he trusted her. Maybe that was careless. But trust isn't something I wanted to punish. 14 months passed. Ethan and Rachel were excellent tenants. Rent arrived every month. They took care of the place. Rachel even planted flowers near the back deck. I visited twice. Everything looked better than when they moved in. But during those 14 months, I kept thinking about one thing. Raymond laughing. Not obsessively. I wasn't sitting awake at night plotting revenge. It was more like a lesson I couldn't forget. He had looked at something I owned and mentally moved it into his family's future. And if he could do that with one house, what else had he already counted? My home, my investments, My retirement accounts? My company proceeds? Everything Michael might eventually inherit? I didn't blame Michael. And strangely, I didn't even entirely blame Emily. But I had seen enough. One Tuesday morning, I called Robert. I want to sell the McCall house. He paused. You're sure? Yes. The tenants? Their lease ends in 4 months. Give them first opportunity if they want it. Otherwise sell when the lease ends. Robert was quiet. Then he asked, what are you planning? You know me too well. I've represented you for 17 years. I smiled. The house isn't important anymore. It's worth a substantial amount of money. That money is what's important. Go on. So I explained my plan. When I finished, Robert didn't speak for several seconds. Finally, he said, that's going to require very careful estate planning. Can you do it? Yes. Then do it. For months later, the tenants moved because Ethan had accepted a job in Oregon. Laura listed the property. The market was strong. Within 2 weeks, we had multiple offers. I accepted one from a couple relocating from Salt Lake City. Clean financing. Fast closing. Good price. I signed the papers. And the house was gone. That was a strange feeling. Susan and I had bought it together. For years I thought selling it would feel like losing another piece of her. It didn't. I realized the memories had never belonged to the building. They belonged to me. Nobody could buy those. The proceeds from the sale went directly into a newly created trust. And this is where Raymond's laugh became expensive. Not because I removed Michael from my estate. I didn't. Michael was still my son. He would still inherit generously. I had no intention of punishing him for somebody else's entitlement. Instead, Robert created a structure around the inheritance. Michael remained the primary beneficiary, but any spouse seeking direct legal access to protected trust assets would first need to sign a post-nuptial agreement. Independent attorneys. Voluntary signatures. Full disclosure. Everything properly documented. No shortcuts. No assumptions. No, we're family. I wasn't accusing Emily of planning anything. That wasn't the point. The point was that I had seen her parents treating my property like advance payment on their daughter's future. I wanted a wall between their expectations and my son's inheritance. A legal wall. Quiet. Strong. Boring. The best kind. Then I went one step further. We created a separate legacy fund. It was designed exclusively for my future grandchildren. At the time, Michael and Emily didn't have children. But if they ever did, money would already be waiting. Education. Medical needs. First home. Starting a business. Whatever opportunities made sense. And under certain circumstances, the money could pass directly to those grandchildren without going through either parent. That mattered to me. Susan had always talked about grandchildren. She used to joke that she planned to spoil them so badly Michael would regret ever giving us any. She never got the chance. So I decided part of what we built together would still reach them, even if she couldn't. When Robert finished the documents, I read everything twice. Then I signed. I told nobody. Instead, I took a vacation. That surprised everyone. I flew to Charleston, South Carolina, and spent a week doing almost nothing productive. It was wonderful. I ate seafood, walked along the Battery, sat outside with coffee in the mornings, read a history book I had owned for 3 years without opening, slept until 8. One afternoon, I bought postcards. I sent one to an old friend, one to Michael, and one to Michael and Emily's house. The message was simple. Having a great week. Needed the break. See you soon. Dad. That was it. I imagined Emily holding that postcard. By then she knew the McCall house had been sold. I had never explained why. Never argued. Never accused her. Never demanded an apology. I had simply sold the property and gone on vacation. Sometimes silence creates more questions than anger ever could. When I returned to Boise, I called Michael. How was Charleston? He asked. Excellent. You sound relaxed. I am. Then I said, I need you and Emily to come over Saturday afternoon. Immediately his voice changed. Everything okay? Everything's fine. For what? Estate planning. Pause. Robert will be here. Longer pause. All right. Saturday morning I woke before 6. Made coffee. Cleaned the kitchen even though it was already clean. Old habit. Robert arrived around 1. He carried a leather briefcase full of documents. We sat at the dining room table. How do you want to handle this? He asked. Just explain it. Everything. Everything. No speeches. I might have one. Robert smiled. I assumed you would. Michael and Emily arrived 20 minutes later. Michael wore jeans and a dark button-down shirt. Emily had her hair tied back. She looked nervous. The moment she saw Robert's briefcase, she looked at me. I smiled. Come in. We sat around the table. Robert at one end, me at the other, Michael and Emily between us. I folded my hands. I asked you here because I've made some decisions about my estate. I don't want anyone hearing pieces of this later and misunderstanding them. So Robert is going to explain everything now. Michael nodded. Emily said nothing. Go ahead, I told Robert. He began with the sale of the McCall house. Completed. Proceeds received. Then he explained the trust. Michael listened carefully. At first, I could see tension in his face. I think part of him worried I had changed my will and cut him out. I hadn't. When Robert explained that Michael remained the primary beneficiary, his shoulders relaxed. Emily's did too. Then Robert turned the page. He explained the spousal access provision. Any spouse seeking certain rights or access involving trust assets would need a valid postnuptial agreement. Separate counsel. Voluntary execution. Full financial disclosure. Everything formal. The room became completely silent. Emily stared at Robert, then at the document, then at me. Her face changed. First surprise, then understanding. She knew exactly where it came from. She didn't need me to mention McCall. She didn't need me to say Raymond's name. She knew. And then something happened I hadn't expected. She looked relieved. Not happy. Not exactly. Relieved. Like some burden had been removed from her shoulders. That told me there were probably conversations inside the Collins family I knew nothing about. Maybe Raymond had talked openly about Michael's future inheritance. Maybe Patricia had asked questions. Maybe Emily had spent years trying to ignore it. I didn't know, and I didn't ask. Michael read the clause again, then looked at me. Dad, yes. This isn't about Emily, is it? I considered my answer. It's about protecting what I leave you. He nodded slowly, then looked at his wife. Emily was staring down at the table. Robert continued. He explained the grandchildren's legacy fund. That was when Emily finally reacted emotionally. Her eyes filled. She covered her mouth for a moment. Michael reached across the table and took her hand. Robert explained that the fund would exist independently, that if Michael and Emily had children someday, those children would have resources protected specifically for them. Emily wiped one eye. You did that for kids who don't even exist yet. I looked at her. Your mother-in-law would have. That broke something open. Emily started crying. Quietly. Michael squeezed her hand. I didn't feel victorious. That's important. There was no pleasure in seeing her cry. This wasn't about humiliating her. It was about making sure the future had boundaries. When Robert finished, he closed the folder. Nobody spoke for a while. Finally, I stood. I looked at Michael. Then Emily. I spent most of my life building what you see here. I gestured toward the documents. Money is part of it. Property is part of it. But mostly it's time. Every dollar represents hours somebody worked. Every investment represents something we chose not to spend. Every property represents risk we decided to take. I paused. I'm not protecting these things because I love you less. Michael looked at me. I'm protecting them because I love you enough to think about what happens when I'm not here. Then I looked at Emily. And I want something understood clearly. She met my eyes. You are my daughter-in-law. You are Michael's wife. I want your marriage to succeed. Her eyes filled again. But nobody gets to count my assets while I'm still alive. She nodded. I continued. Nobody gets to walk into my house because they think they'll eventually have some connection to it. Another nod. And nobody gets to laugh about inheritance in my living room while drinking whiskey they didn't buy. That almost made Michael smile. Emily actually let out a small laugh through her tears. Then she said, I understand. I believed her. Robert stayed for lunch. Nothing fancy. Sandwiches. Coffee. We talked about football and property taxes. Normal things. When Michael and Emily were leaving, Michael hugged me. Not the quick shoulder hug men sometimes give each other. A real hug. Thanks, Dad. For what? He stepped back. For thinking ahead. I nodded. That's the job. Emily stood near the door. She hesitated. Then she said, My dad was wrong. I didn't answer immediately. She continued. He shouldn't have gone into the house. No. And I shouldn't have given him the key. No. She looked down. I thought they were just staying one night. That was new information. I waited. He told me it was only him and Mom. I didn't know Brandon was coming. I didn't know those other people were there. I believed that too. He also told me they'd leave everything exactly as they found it. I raised an eyebrow. Emily gave a tired smile. I know. Then she looked at me. When you showed up, Dad called me afterward. He said you were being dramatic. I almost laughed. I'm sure he did. He said the house would belong to us eventually anyway. There it was. Again. Emily shook her head. I told him never to say that again. I studied her face. Did he? Not to me. That answer was probably as truthful as any answer could be. She hugged me. That surprised me. Then she and Michael left. 7 weeks later, Emily signed the post-nuptial agreement. I didn't ask her to rush. I didn't even bring it up. She hired her own attorney. Robert had no involvement in representing her. Everything was reviewed independently. She signed voluntarily. Afterward, Michael called me. It's done. How do you feel? Good. And Emily? Honestly, always. Better than before. That interested me. Why? He hesitated, then said, her parents talk about money too much. I leaned back in my chair. How much is too much? They've made comments for years. Mostly jokes. I knew exactly what kind of jokes. Michael continued. Your house. The business. Investments. What we'll inherit someday. And you never told me? I didn't think it mattered. It didn't. Until McCall. Exactly. He sighed. Emily hated it. That explained the relief at the table. She never knew how to tell them to stop without turning it into a fight. And now? Now she tells them none of it concerns them. I smiled. Good. Raymond never called me. Not once. That told me more than any apology could have. He knew. Of course he knew. Emily told her parents about the sale. About the trust. About the post-nuptial agreement. Probably about the grandchildren's fund too. I sometimes imagine that conversation. Raymond sitting at his kitchen table. Coffee in front of him. Patricia nearby. Emily explaining that the McCall house was gone. Sold. The money protected. Michael still inheriting, but under a structure Raymond could neither influence nor casually treat as family property. And somewhere during that conversation, I imagine Raymond remembering himself sitting in my leather chair, holding my bourbon, laughing. That's the funny thing about consequences. They rarely look impressive while they're being created. A laugh lasts 3 seconds. A signature lasts considerably longer. Years passed. Michael and Emily stayed married. More importantly, they seemed happy. And eventually Susan's dream came true. They had a daughter. My granddaughter, Lily. The first time I held her, she was barely 6 pounds. Tiny little hands. Dark hair. She slept against my chest while Michael stood beside me looking terrified and proud at the same time. I thought about Susan. I wish she could have been there. Then I thought about the legacy fund. Lily had been alive less than 48 hours. And something her grandmother and grandfather had built years earlier was already waiting for her. Not because she was entitled to it. Because she was loved before she even arrived. There's a difference. A big one. Raymond and Patricia eventually came to Boise to meet her. Michael asked me beforehand if I was comfortable being in the same room. Of course. You sure? I'm not afraid of your father-in-law. He laughed. I know. The meeting happened at Michael's house. Raymond looked older. Not dramatically. Just enough. He shook my hand. Thomas. Raymond. That was it. No speech. No apology. No mention of McCall. At one point, I went into the kitchen for coffee. Raymond followed a minute later. For a while, we stood there without speaking. Then he said, Beautiful granddaughter. She is. You must be proud. Very. He nodded. Another silence. Then he said something I never expected. I got carried away up there. I looked at him. He didn't say McCall. He didn't have to. Yes, I said. I shouldn't have assumed. No. He looked toward the living room where Emily was holding Lily. I understand that now. I poured coffee. Good. That was all. Some men need forgiveness delivered like a ceremony. Raymond wasn't getting one. But I didn't need to punish him forever either. He had learned. That was enough for me. Before he left that evening, he shook my hand again. This time the handshake lasted a little longer. Respect is strange. Sometimes people give it freely. Sometimes you have to teach them where the boundary is. Raymond learned mine. The McCall house belongs to another family now. I drove past it once about a year ago. The new owners had painted the front door dark green. There were bicycles near the garage. Somebody had hung string lights across the back deck. For a second, I thought I might feel something. Loss. Nostalgia. Regret. I didn't. I smiled. It wasn't mine anymore. And that was perfectly fine. Because the important thing had never been keeping the house. The important thing was deciding what my work meant. I spent decades building security for my family. Raymond's mistake was thinking that because my son would someday benefit from that work, Everyone connected to my son had already earned access to it. They hadn't. Inheritance isn't ownership in advance. Love isn't permission. Family isn't a key that opens every door. And generosity without boundaries can turn into entitlement faster than most people realize. I never disowned my son. I never destroyed his marriage. I never screamed at Emily. I never threatened Raymond. I didn't need to. I sold a house. I hired a good attorney. I protected my son. I protected grandchildren who hadn't even been born yet. Then I took a vacation. That was my revenge, if you want to call it revenge. But personally, I think revenge is the wrong word. It was correction. Raymond thought he had already seen the future. I simply reminded him that it wasn't his future to distribute. And that bottle of bourbon? He replaced it. Not immediately. About 3 weeks after the certified letter arrived, a package showed up at my house. Inside was a brand new bottle. No apology. No note. Just the bourbon. I kept it unopened. Years later, on the night Lily was born, Michael came over after leaving the hospital. He was exhausted. His hair was a mess. He looked happier than I had ever seen him. I went to the cabinet, pulled out that bottle. Michael recognized it. "You've still got that?" I was waiting for the right occasion. I opened it, poured 2 glasses. We walked onto the back porch. For a minute, neither of us spoke. Then Michael raised his glass. "To Lily." I raised mine. "To Lily." We drank, and I couldn't help smiling. Raymond had once opened my bourbon because he thought my future already belonged to his family. Years later, the replacement bottle was opened by me and my son to celebrate the birth of the little girl whose future I had quietly protected before she even existed. Life has a sense of humor. You just have to live long enough to appreciate it. So tell me this. If you came home and found your in-laws sitting inside your house, drinking your whiskey and laughing about what they expected to inherit after you were gone, would you forgive them and move on, or would you make sure they never confused your generosity with ownership again?